The forest was unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. Lieutenant Commander Jake Harper crouched low, scanning the dense foliage with practiced eyes. His boots pressed lightly into the damp soil, and the air around him was thick with the earthy scent of alien moss. His team was spread out, barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the jagged canopy overhead. Silent. Steady. Focused. Movement? Jake whispered into his comm, his voice barely louder than a breath. Negative, replied Corporal Davis, his voice clipped but steady. Clear on my end. Jake's gut told him otherwise. Something felt off. Years of combat experience, years of crawling through hellholes and walking out alive, taught him to trust that instinct. His heart wasn't pounding from paranoia. It was warning him. Eyes sharp, Jake murmured, his tone sharper now. We're not alone. The mission had been simple. Recon a suspected weapons depot on August 7, gather intel, and exfil undetected. No fireworks. No heavy lifting. Just get in, get out. But Jake knew better than to trust routine in enemy territory. And tonight, his instincts were screaming that the plan was about to go sideways. A faint rustle echoed in the distance, barely audible over the ambient hum of the alien night. Jake froze. The sound was too deliberate. His jaw clenched as his eyes locked onto the source. 50 meters ahead, beyond the tree line, a shadow moved, too smooth for a breeze, too precise for an animal. Hold, Jake whispered, his fingers signaling his team to stop. His pulse slowed as his breathing became controlled and shallow. I've got movement. 11 o'clock. A pause. Confirmed. Sergeant O'Neill hissed. Thermals are picking up, shit, a lot of heat signatures. They're closing in. Jake's blood ran cold. Ambush. Break formation. Fall back, regroup at waypoint Bravo. Jake ordered softly, but his tone left no room for argument. His team melted into the darkness like ghosts, their training kicking in without hesitation. Silent and efficient. But Jake knew this wasn't a random patrol. Someone had sold them out. They weren't being observed. They were being hunted. Omega Protocol, he murmured, switching to encrypted comms. They knew we were coming. Copy that, Davis whispered. Orders? Survive, Jake muttered, already calculating the next move. A burst of plasma fire erupted from the tree line, bright enough to momentarily blind him. Jake dove sideways, rolling into the underbrush as energy bolts tore through where he'd been crouching. The air sizzled, the distinct whine of high-powered energy weapons filling the night. Contact! Multiple hostiles! O'Neill barked, his voice crackling over comms. Jake's mind sharpened, everything slowing down. Fight or die. Simple. He emerged from cover, rifle raised, and fired off a series of controlled bursts. 3 hostiles went down before they knew what hit them. Jake didn't hesitate. He moved, weaving through the foliage, flanking, always one step ahead. His instincts guided him through the chaos. Years of combat experience had drilled this into his bones. Harper, we're pinned down! Davis's voice strained through the comms, the sound of return fire loud in the background. Hold position. I'm moving, Jake growled, ducking under low-hanging branches as he sprinted toward the firefight. A plasma bolt sizzled past his face, singing the air. Jake hit the ground hard, rolling to a crouch. His pulse pounded in his ears, adrenaline driving him forward. He wasn't going to let his team die out here. On me! Jake barked as he broke into a sprint. He spotted Davis and 2 others huddled behind the jagged remains of a downed shuttle, exchanging fire with advancing hostiles. Omega's forces moved with ruthless precision, highly trained, methodical, and relentless. Covering fire! Jake shouted, and the team responded instantly, laying down a barrage as Jake moved. He hit the flank fast, slipping behind enemy lines with surgical efficiency. 3 shots, 3 kills. Silent. Clean. Move now! Jake ordered, and his team bolted, breaking free of the kill zone. But as they fell back, Jake caught sight of a glint of metal overhead, Drones. Multiple. High-altitude surveillance. Eyes up. We've got drones tracking, he muttered grimly. They're not just after us. O'Neill's voice crackled. This was a setup. They want you, Jake. Jake's jaw clenched. Of course. Roland Torvik. Exfil's compromised, Jake murmured, checking his tactical map. Alternate route. We split. Meet at Waypoint Echo. Go dark. Copy. Came the chorus of responses, but there was a weight to it, uncertainty, dread. They all knew the odds. Stay alive, Jake added softly, his tone carrying an unspoken promise. As his team peeled off, Jake doubled back, moving deeper into the forest. He needed to buy them time. Task Force Omega wasn't interested in his unit. They wanted him. And Jake was more than willing to give them what they wanted, on his terms. A ripple of energy crackled through the air, a disruption pulse. His comms fizzled, then died. Jammed. Shit, Jake muttered under his breath. They were cutting off his escape. Hurting him. Good. Let them. Jake's mind shifted gears. If they wanted him, he'd give them a fight they'd never forget. He moved like a shadow through the foliage, circling back toward the source of the disruption pulse. His blade whispered from its sheath, ancient, primitive, but deadly in the right hands. A squad of Omega's best stood between him and his objective. Their armor gleamed under the moonlight, sleek and imposing, but they were too confident. Too rigid. Jake was a predator now. He struck fast. Silent. A knife to the throat of the first. The second didn't have time to scream before Jake's blade slid between the plates of his armor. The third went down with a muffled gasp, and Jake melted back into the shadows before the bodies hit the ground. Come on, Torvik, Jake murmured, wiping the blade clean. Send me your best. Let's see what they're made of. A sudden burst of static filled the air. Jake barely had time to react before a cold, calculated voice echoed through the clearing. Commander Harper, came Roland Torvik's smug tone over the open comms. Surrender yourself immediately. There is nowhere to run. Jake's lips curled into a grim smile. Underestimate me, he whispered softly, disappearing into the night. I dare you. Jake Harper moved like a shadow through the dense underbrush, his breathing controlled, every step measured. The forest around him was alien, but instincts honed by years of combat allowed him to adapt seamlessly. His senses were dialed to maximum, every rustle, every distant sound registered in his mind. His body moved, but his brain was calculating variables, terrain, distance, enemy patrol routes. There was no room for error now. The ambush had wiped out half his team. Davis, O'Neill, and the others had scattered, hopefully staying low and sticking to the fallback plan. But Jake knew the odds. Task Force Omega wasn't just hunting them, they were hurting them. And if Jake didn't move fast, none of them were getting off this moon alive. He paused, crouching low behind a cluster of twisted alien trees, eyes narrowing at the subtle glow of a drone passing overhead. Silent, but not invisible. Jake tracked its path, counting seconds, mapping the pattern in his head. The tech was good, better than most of what he'd encountered before, but it wasn't flawless. Nothing was. Too predictable, he murmured softly. Timing the next pass, Jake moved quickly, darting through the foliage with practiced grace. The forest floor, thick with bioluminescent moss, barely made a sound under his boots. His muscles burned, but he pushed forward. Pain was secondary. Mission first. Always. His comms were still down, courtesy of Omega's disruption pulse. No backup. No updates. He was on his own now. That was fine. Jake had been alone before. He knew how to operate when the odds were stacked, and right now, those odds were looking downright impossible. Another wrestle. Closer this time. Jake froze, his body going still, eyes locking onto the movement ahead. 2 hostiles. Armed. Patrol. Their movements were disciplined but rigid. Professionals, but not used to this kind of terrain. They relied too much on their tech. Jake relied on instincts. And instincts always had the edge. He waited, counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. They passed within 6 feet of his position. Close enough for him to hear the faint hum of their weapons' power cores. Close enough to smell the faint metallic tang of their armor's coolant system. But Jake didn't move. Not yet. When the second soldier turned to check his rear, Jake struck. Swift. Silent. His knife found the first target's throat, severing flesh and artery in one clean motion. Before the second soldier could react, Jake had him on the ground, his knee crushing down on the alien's windpipe. The soldier's eyes widened in terror before Jake's blade silenced him. No wasted motion. No sound. Jake dragged the bodies into the underbrush, concealing them before rifling through their gear. The comm unit was encrypted, useless to him. But the pulse grenade on the belt? That was a different story. He pocketed it, along with a spare energy cell. Better than nothing, he muttered, rising to his feet. The terrain ahead was unforgiving, steep ridges, uneven ground, and thick foliage that seemed to shift and pulse in the moonlight. But Jake knew it also gave him the advantage. Task Force Omega relied on their tech to give them superiority. Jake relied on the terrain. And out here? The terrain belonged to him. He moved with purpose, sticking to the shadows, skirting along the ridgeline where the drones wouldn't easily detect his heat signature. Every step was calculated. Every breath controlled. Time was running out, and he needed to find his team before Omega closed the net. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Low. Ground level. Not enemy patrols. Tracks. Jake knelt, fingers brushing against the faint impressions in the soft soil. Human. Heavy boot treads. Recent. His team. They were still alive. Good, Jake breathed, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. He followed the trail, keeping low, ears tuned to any sign of pursuit. Minutes stretched into eternity, each step bringing him closer. Finally, the faintest sound reached his ears, muffled voices. Human. Familiar. Hold position, he whispered, approaching with practiced stealth. Davis and O'Neill were crouched in a small ravine, partially hidden by thick foliage. Their weapons were drawn, eyes scanning the perimeter. Jake's approach was silent, but they still noticed, SEAL instincts never dulled. Harper, Davis hissed, relief flooding his voice. Good to see you breathing, Jake murmured, crouching beside them. Thought you bought it back there, O'Neill added, eyes narrowing. How the hell did you get out? Later, Jake said softly. We don't have time. Drones are sweeping, and Omega's closing in. We move now, or we don't move at all. Davis nodded, his expression grim. The others? Scattered, Jake said, eyes scanning the area. Waypoint echoes compromised. We head for Delta. Alternate route. Double back through the gorge. That's a death trap, O'Neill muttered. Better than waiting to get boxed in, Jake countered. We keep moving. Silent. Fast. Copy that, Davis murmured. They moved as one, slipping through the forest like ghosts. Jake took point, his senses heightened, every muscle coiled and ready. They covered ground quickly, but Jake could feel it, Omega wasn't far behind. They were tracking them, closing the net. As they reached the edge of the gorge, Jake paused, eyes narrowing. Something felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. Wait, Jake murmured, holding up a hand. Something's off. Davis froze. What is it? Jake's eyes scanned the area, looking for anything, any sign that the enemy was lying in wait. And then he saw it. Barely noticeable. A faint shimmer in the air. A cloaked drone. Almost invisible, but not quite. Shit, Jake muttered, his jaw tightening. They were walking into a trap. Back, Jake ordered softly. Double back. Quiet. But it was too late. The drone's shimmer flickered, and a pulse shot through the air. An alert. Move! Jake barked, and they bolted just as the first wave of plasma fire erupted from the tree line. Jake's mind shifted instantly, calculating cover, distance, angles. His team followed without hesitation, zigzagging through the underbrush as bolts of searing energy tore through the air. Trees splintered, foliage ignited, and the night was alive with chaos. Jake dove behind a fallen tree, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. His mind was already working the next step. They were surrounded. "Harper!" O'Neill shouted over the commotion, ducking behind cover. "Options?" "Working on it," Jake growled, eyes scanning the area. Then he saw it. A narrow path leading down into the gorge. Dangerous. Treacherous. But it was their only way out. "Down the gorge!" Jake ordered. "Now!" Without hesitation, his team followed. Plasma fire rained down as they scrambled over the edge, sliding into the darkness below. Jake was the last to move, covering their retreat until the last possible second. As he slipped into the gorge, a grim smile tugged at his lips. They'd underestimated him again. Good. Let them. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The gorge was darker than sin. The only light came from the faint bioluminescent moss clinging to the jagged walls. Jake Harper led the way, his movements precise and silent, every step calculated to avoid loose rocks that could give away their position. The walls echoed the distant hum of enemy patrols overhead. Task Force Omega wasn't giving up easily. "Keep low. Single file," Jake murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Davis followed closely, his breathing steady but strained. O'Neill brought up the rear, his rifle cradled tight to his chest. No one spoke. No one needed to. Years of training had made silence second nature. But Jake felt the tension radiating from them, the weight of exhaustion pressing down after hours of running, fighting, and surviving. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, but there was no time. Jake's mind was already 3 steps ahead. Omega wasn't just hunting them, they were flushing them toward a kill zone. The gorge was their only way out, but it was a gamble. The narrow path was treacherous, winding downward toward the unknown, but it gave them cover. For now. "Movement up ahead," O'Neill murmured softly, his voice barely carrying over the faint hum of distant drones. Jake froze, eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness. His vision adjusted quickly, picking up the faintest flicker of motion. Too smooth. Too deliberate. "Not ours," Jake whispered. "Omega?" Davis asked, keeping his voice low. "Negative." Jake's jaw tightened. "Too small. Local wildlife." "Friendly?" O'Neill muttered, though they all knew the answer before Jake spoke. "Unlikely." Jake's eyes tracked the shadows, catching glimpses of sinuous movement along the rock walls. Predators. Nocturnal, judging by the way they clung to the dark corners, waiting. Their elongated bodies shimmered with a faint, iridescent glow, blending into the surroundings with unsettling ease. Silent. Deadly. "Keep moving. Slow and steady," Jake ordered, his tone leaving no room for debate. They moved deeper into the gorge, careful not to draw attention. The creatures watched but didn't engage. Not yet. Jake kept his focus sharp, his instincts screaming that the real danger was still ahead. Minutes passed like hours. The air grew colder, thicker. The gorge narrowed, the walls pressing in, forcing them to move in tighter formation. Jake's mind catalogued every detail, every sound, every shift in the air. His gut told him something was wrong. The terrain was working against them, herding them toward a bottleneck. "Harper," Davis whispered, his voice tight. "You feel that?" Jake nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Trap." The gorge widened suddenly, opening into a shallow basin. Too open. Too exposed. Jake's grip on his rifle tightened as his mind ran through possibilities. This was the perfect kill zone. Omega didn't need to flush them out if they could corner them here. "Fan out. Cover all angles," Jake ordered, his voice low but firm. "Keep your eyes sharp." They moved quickly, taking cover behind jagged rocks and fallen debris. Jake knelt low, his eyes scanning the shadows. Something was off. The silence was too heavy, the air too still. "Where the hell are they?" O'Neill muttered, his voice barely audible. "They're waiting," Jake murmured, his mind piecing it together. "They want us to move first." A faint click echoed through the air. Jake's heart stopped for half a beat. "Down!" he barked. The first explosion tore through the basin, sending a shockwave that rattled Jake's teeth. Dirt and debris erupted around them as the ground trembled. Plasma turrets sprang to life from hidden alcoves, unleashing a relentless barrage of fire that lit up the night. "Move! Now!" Jake shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. They scattered, diving for cover as bolts of searing plasma carved through the air. Jake rolled behind a jagged outcrop, breathing hard as he assessed the situation. Omega had set the trap perfectly. Turrets. Automated. Heat-seeking. They didn't need soldiers down here. They just needed to wait. "Shit," Davis growled, huddled behind cover a few meters away. "They boxed us in." "Not yet," Jake muttered, his mind racing. The turrets weren't random. They were targeting heat signatures. Predictable. Jake's eyes flicked to the pulse grenade he'd lifted off the Omega soldier earlier. A plan formed instantly. "Cover me," Jake said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Jake, wait!" O'Neill started, but Jake was already moving. He sprinted low, zigzagging through the barrage of plasma fire. His body moved on pure instinct, each step precise, each motion calculated. Plasma bolts scorched the ground inches from his boots, but Jake didn't slow. Come on, he muttered under his breath, counting seconds. He slid behind a rocky outcrop near the closest turret, heart pounding in his ears. The pulse grenade was already primed in his hand. Jake's eyes locked onto the turret's heat sensor, a faint red glow buried deep within its casing. "Let's see how smart you really are," Jake murmured, lobbing the grenade with deadly precision. The pulse detonated in a wave of electromagnetic disruption. The turret flickered, stuttered, and went silent. Jake didn't waste a second. He was moving again before the dust had settled, already targeting the next turret. "One down," Jake breathed, his voice crackling in the comms. "On it!" Davis barked, picking off a secondary turret with a well-placed shot. O'Neill followed, laying down suppressing fire to cover their advance. The tide was shifting, but they weren't out yet. Jake's mind worked overtime, mapping every angle, every possible threat. He knew they had minutes, maybe seconds, before Omega realized what was happening. "Push forward!" Jake commanded, his voice sharp and steady. They advanced with ruthless efficiency, taking out turrets one by one, each victory pushing them closer to the edge of the kill zone. Jake's muscles burned, his lungs screamed for air, but he didn't slow. Failure wasn't an option. "Last one!" Davis shouted, taking aim. The final turret went dark with a satisfying hiss. Silence fell over the basin, broken only by the ragged breathing of Jake and his team. "Clear," Jake muttered, but his instincts didn't relax. Something still felt off. "We're not out yet," O'Neill murmured, voicing what Jake was thinking. "Agreed," Jake said softly, eyes scanning the area. His gut was screaming again. The turrets weren't the only threat. A faint tremor vibrated through the ground. "Move!" Jake whispered, his voice laced with urgency. They barely had time to react before the ground beneath them rumbled violently. A low, mechanical hum filled the air as the gorge walls shifted, panels sliding open to reveal something far worse. "Drones!" Davis hissed, his voice tight with dread. "Dozens of them. Sleek. Fast. Armed." Jake's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as he raised his rifle. "All right," he murmured, his tone cold and steady. "Let's finish this." They had come too far to die now. The air was thick with tension, the mechanical hum of approaching drones growing louder with each passing second. Jake Harper's grip on his rifle tightened, his mind racing through possible outcomes. His body was exhausted, muscles screaming, but he pushed it all aside. Survival was instinct now. And instinct never hesitated. "Drones closing fast," O'Neill muttered, his voice barely above a growl. His eyes scanned the approaching swarm, the red glow of targeting systems locking in. Not just drones, Jake murmured, his tone laced with warning. Listen. The faintest vibration echoed through the ground, subtle, but unmistakable. Heavy. Measured. Jake's jaw clenched. Walkers. Omega wasn't just sending drones. They were deploying automated assault units. Bipedal tanks. Massive. Relentless. And equipped with enough firepower to turn the gorge into molten slag. Shit, Davis hissed, adjusting his grip. We're outgunned, Harper. Not out yet, Jake said, voice calm but firm. We've got one shot. We use the terrain. Drones can't maneuver as fast down here, and those walkers are too big for the narrow paths. O'Neill glanced toward the narrowing canyon walls up ahead. You're thinking bottleneck. Jake gave a tight nod. We lure them in, stack the bodies. Won't hold them off forever. Davis murmured, eyes narrowing. Doesn't have to, Jake replied softly. Just long enough. Long enough for what? O'Neill asked, already falling into step beside him. For me to get to that comm tower, Jake said, his mind already locked on the objective. Omega's jamming signal is coming from the ridge. I take it out, we get comms back online, and Earth hears what's happening. Reinforcements come. We make it out alive. And if we don't hold? Davis asked, his expression grim. Jake's eyes hardened. We hold. A beat of silence passed between them. No one questioned it. They knew what was at stake. They knew the odds. But Jake didn't deal in odds. He dealt in certainties. And right now, the only certainty was that they weren't dying in this goddamn gorge. Set charges, Jake ordered, his voice steady. We make them bleed for every inch. Davis and O'Neill moved quickly, planting explosives along the narrowest point of the gorge. The charges weren't high yield, enough to collapse part of the path and buy them a few precious minutes. Minutes that could mean life or death. Turrets ready, O'Neill murmured, his hands flying over the makeshift control panel salvaged from the disabled Omega units. Manual override. They won't expect us to turn their own toys against them. Good, Jake said softly, his eyes fixed on the incoming swarm. They won't expect a lot of things. The drones were closing fast now, sleek, deadly machines built for precision. Jake raised his rifle, exhaling slowly. His heartbeat slowed, focus sharpening. He aimed for the lead drone, tracking its trajectory. Wait for it, Jake murmured. The drone surged forward, weaving through the air like a swarm of angry hornets. Steady, Jake said, his finger tightening on the trigger. Another beat. Now. Jake's first shot took down the lead drone in a burst of sparks. O'Neill's turret systems kicked in, spitting out controlled bursts of plasma that shredded through the incoming swarm. Drones exploded in midair, debris raining down like deadly confetti. Keep them coming! O'Neill growled, his hands working the controls with surgical precision. Jake didn't stop moving. He shifted positions, staying unpredictable, making himself a harder target. His rifle barked, dropping drones with each precise shot. But for every one they took down, two more seemed to take its place. Too many, Davis muttered, his voice tight with strain. Hold the line, Jake commanded, his tone leaving no room for doubt. The first walker came into view, a hulking behemoth of reinforced armor and plasma cannons. Its mechanical joints hissed with each step, the ground trembling beneath its weight. Here we go, Jake murmured under his breath. The charges were set. The bottleneck was tight. If they played this right, Omega would choke on their own overconfidence. Detonate on my mark, Jake ordered, eyes locked on the advancing walker. The machine stepped into the kill zone, its sensors sweeping for targets. Jake waited, counting heartbeats. Timing had to be perfect. Come on, Jake whispered, sweat dripping down his temple. The walker's foot hit the center of the trap. Mark! Jake barked. Davis hit the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The ground buckled, rock and debris cascading down, slamming into the walker with devastating force. Its legs crumpled, sending the massive machine crashing to the ground, taking out several drones in the process. "That's one," O'Neill muttered, but his voice was strained. "We won't get lucky twice." "Don't need luck," Jake replied, already moving toward the ridge. "Cover me." "Harper," Davis started, but Jake was gone, slipping through the chaos like a ghost. Plasma fire lit up the night, but Jake moved with purpose, staying low, using the smoke and debris as cover. His muscles burned, his body screaming for rest, but he ignored it. There was no stopping. Not now. The ridge was steep, the climb brutal. But Jake's mind was locked on one thing: reaching that comm tower. The source of Omega's jamming signal. It was close now, just beyond the next rise. "Almost there," Jake murmured, pushing harder. A sudden burst of fire erupted from above. Jake dove, rolling behind a boulder as plasma bolts chewed into the ground where he'd stood. Another walker. This one smaller but faster, built for pursuit. "Persistent bastards," Jake growled, his jaw tightening. He didn't have time for this. He needed to reach the tower. Jake's eyes scanned the area, mind working fast. The walker was closing, its targeting systems locking on. Jake's fingers brushed against the pulse grenade still strapped to his belt. His mind calculated angles, timing. "All right," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. "Let's dance." Jake bolted from cover, drawing the walker's attention. It fired, plasma bolts searing through the air, barely missing him. But Jake wasn't running. He was positioning. One shot. One throw. Jake dove, rolling into a crouch. The grenade left his hand, arcing perfectly. It hit the walker's exposed vent, detonating with a burst of energy that sent the machine crashing to the ground. "Clear!" Jake breathed, rising to his feet. The comm tower loomed ahead, its signal pulsing through the air, jamming everything within range. Jake sprinted the last few meters, his knife already in hand. He didn't have time for finesse. He plunged the blade into the control panel, severing the main power conduit. The jamming signal died instantly. "Harper, we're online!" Davis's voice crackled through the comms. "Send the signal," Jake ordered, his chest heaving. "Get Earth on the line. Tell them what's happening." "Copy that," O'Neill replied, urgency in his voice. Jake's eyes scanned the battlefield below. Omega's forces were faltering, their coordination breaking. And reinforcements weren't far now. "Hold on," Jake murmured, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Just a little longer." They weren't done yet. But they were damn close. Jake Harper stood at the edge of the ridge, eyes locked on the battlefield below. Smoke drifted across the gorge, thick and acrid, carrying the stench of scorched metal and burned circuitry. Drones lay scattered like broken toys, and the wreckage of 2 downed walkers smoldered in the moonlight. But Task Force Omega wasn't done yet. Movement. Fast. Coordinated. "Harper!" Davis's voice crackled over the comm, urgency bleeding through the static. "Omega's regrouping. More incoming." "How long until reinforcements get here?" Jake asked, his jaw clenched. "ETA 7 minutes," Davis replied, his tone tight. "But we may not have 7. Jake's eyes narrowed as he tracked the advancing wave. Infantry. Armored units. Drones sweeping the perimeter. Omega was throwing everything they had left. Desperation. They were trying to finish this before Earth's backup arrived. "Then we make it 7. Jake murmured, his voice steady. "Harper, we're running on fumes," O'Neill said, his breath ragged over the line. "Ammo's low. We can't hold them off forever." "We don't need forever," Jake replied, his mind already calculating. "We just need to hold the line long enough." Jake's eyes locked on a narrow choke point at the base of the ridge. The wreckage from the fallen walkers had created a natural bottleneck. It was their last advantage. If Omega wanted to take them out, they'd have to come through there. "Set up defensive positions," Jake ordered, his tone sharp and commanding. "Davis, take the left flank. O'Neill, cover the right. We hold this ground until backup gets here." "Copy that," Davis replied, moving into position. Understood, O'Neill added, his tone grim but determined. Jake knelt by the edge of the ridge, checking his rifle. Only one full magazine left. He ran his fingers over the spare energy cell in his belt. One charge. One last shot if things went south. His knife was strapped to his thigh, but if it came down to that, it meant the fight was already over. Harper! O'Neill's voice came through softly, barely above a whisper. What if they break through? They won't, Jake replied, but his tone was more for them than himself. O'Neill didn't push. He knew better. But Jake could feel it. O'Neill wasn't asking out of fear. It was practical. Realistic. The odds weren't good. They never had been. Eyes up, Jake murmured, his gaze hardening. Here they come. The first wave hit hard. Drones led the charge, weaving through the wreckage, plasma turrets spitting fire as they closed the distance. Jake squeezed the trigger, his shots precise and unforgiving. Each burst found its mark, sending sparks and metal fragments cascading through the air. Left side's heating up, Davis shouted, his rifle barking as he held the line. Stay on it, Jake growled, shifting his position. He took aim at an approaching squad of infantry, their energy shields flickering as they advanced. 3 shots. Center mass. Shields collapsed, bodies dropped. Reloading, Jake muttered, his hands moving automatically as he slammed a fresh magazine into place. But they were closing fast. Walker incoming! O'Neill's voice cut through the chaos. Jake's eyes locked onto the approaching machine. Smaller than the previous ones but built for speed. Its cannons charged, plasma cores humming with lethal energy. Not today, Jake murmured, his jaw tightening. He lined up the shot, pulse racing. The walker's weak point was visible, an exposed coolant vent near the joint. One shot. One chance. Jake exhaled, steadying his aim. Got you, he whispered. The shot rang out, hitting true. The walker staggered, its joints seizing as a chain reaction of energy surges tore through its systems. It toppled, crashing into the advancing infantry, creating a wall of debris. Walker down! Jake barked, shifting his focus back to the infantry. Harper, right flank's buckling! O'Neill's voice was strained. Jake's eyes flicked toward O'Neill's position. He was pinned down, plasma bolts raining around him as Omega forces pushed hard on his side. I'm moving, Jake said, already on his feet. He sprinted across the battlefield, weaving through debris, plasma bolts scorching the air around him. His body screamed in protest, but Jake pushed harder, adrenaline dulling the pain. He slid into position beside O'Neill, laying down cover fire. Hold the line, Jake muttered, his shots precise, dropping enemy soldiers one by one. We're getting overrun, O'Neill growled, sweat dripping down his face. Jake's mind raced. They couldn't hold much longer. Not like this. Fall back to the choke point, Jake ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. Tighten the formation. Make them come to us. Copy that, Davis replied, his voice ragged but steady. They moved with precision, falling back step by step, keeping their fire controlled. Omega's forces surged forward, desperate to press the advantage. But Jake was ready. On my mark, Jake said softly, his eyes locked on the advancing wave. The moment they entered the choke point, Jake's voice echoed across the calm. Now. Davis triggered the charges. The explosion rocked the gorge, sending a cascade of rock and debris crashing down, cutting off Omega's advance. Dust and smoke filled the air, but Jake didn't stop. He fired into the confusion, picking off stragglers, keeping them pinned down. That's it! Davis shouted. They're boxed in. Hold the perimeter, Jake ordered, his voice steel. We're almost there. But Jake's gut told him it wasn't over. Not yet. A new sound echoed through the gorge. A deep, resonant hum that sent a chill down Jake's spine. Harper, O'Neill murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. What the hell is that? Jake's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. Then he saw it. A massive dropship, sleek and menacing, descending toward the battlefield. Its silhouette was unmistakable, an Omega Command vessel. Roland Torvek, Jake murmured, his jaw tightening. The High Executor had come to finish the job himself. Looks like he didn't want to miss the fireworks, O'Neill muttered, his tone grim. Jake's mind shifted gears instantly. Torvek wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to wipe them out. And if Torvek was on that ship, that meant their window was closing fast. New plan, Jake said, his voice low and steady. We don't wait for backup. We end this now. Harper, that's suicide, Davis murmured, but his tone lacked conviction. Not if we play it right, Jake replied, his mind already piecing together the final steps. We hit the ship. We take out Torvek. Cut the head off the snake. How? O'Neill asked, his voice tight. Jake's eyes locked onto the dropship, his expression hardening. We take the fight to them. No hesitation. No retreat. They were ending this. Tonight.